Hello there. You're listening to the Christchurch Escape podcast. It's the premier Castleford-based faith conversation that we know of. Christian faith, belief in the Bible, particularly some of the weird little books in the Old Testament, can leave us today with some pretty difficult questions. We can't afford the experts, so we might not get to all the answers. But if your week could do with an honest, hearty conversation about what it means to have faith and hold the Bible, this is the place for you. This episode is about sailors, fish faith, national disasters and prayer. We really hope you enjoy it.
Welcome back, everyone. If you're listening again, then
That's great.
Well done.
Woo!
Yeah, you made it to a second podcast. If this is the first time that you've listened to the podcast, you can, of course, go back and listen to last week's, in which we were discussing Jonah chapter 1 verses 1 to 3, but we kind of discussed everything. I'm trying to remember everything we'd covered.
What did we talk about last week?
We covered
Matt?
everything.
We just covered everything.
So go back and listen.
We did cover, do you want some help here with what we talked about last week?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember
We
off
talked
the top of my head.
about the Old Testament.
Yeah, why we should read the Old Testament.
Why we should read it. We talked about Jonah and whether he was real or...
Fairy story.
Yeah, fairy story, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And not being too comfortable and...
Oh, yes, we had that as well.
Towards the end.
There was good
Yeah.
questions about that.
Anyway, so if you didn't listen to that, please go back and listen. You don't have to, of course. Tonight's sermon was on Jonah, chapter 1, going back to verse 1, but through to verse 16. And I'm going to sum that up by saying it's the story of the sailors. Is that fair enough? The ship. Just all the stuff up to the big fish.
We stopped.
We stopped just
as,
before the big fish.
as Jonah entered the ocean and woke up. I think he was asleep.
Does it say ocean or does it say sea?
Sea. Sorry, yes. Yeah, the chaos of the sea. And yeah, we realised that at that point, part of that passage is about Jonah. Well, you realise when you read it that Jonah's asleep for most of it, and actually that's quite, it's a bit of a joke that he's asleep at this critical moment, and he wakes up as he enters the sea. So that was the bit that we looked at.
Yeah. So, and I'm saying that because it might be helpful. If you listen to this and you weren't in the sermon, then you might want to just read through those verses. It might give a bit of context to what we're talking about tonight. It might not, because I've got no idea where this conversation is going to go. Given the conversation that's happened before we've started recording this, I have no idea where this might go.
Similarly, when I wrote the sermon, I was quite taken that you brought up the sailors. It's primarily about Jonah being asleep when he should have been awake
and running away.
Running away, and the hit it is to religious people listening on. But also, you can't help but get carried along with these sailors. These random characters that come along where we don't know anything about them, and yet by the end of it, which sometimes when you're preaching you only really realise it when she's saying it out loud at the end. I thought this is great that they, part of this story is that they find faith in this God, and you can't kind of rule out anything that God can do because these people find faith.
Yeah, I haven't really thought about them till tonight, thinking about like their journey in this. And where they start, where they end up, and it just seemed like they're just a tool. They're just like a vehicle for Jonah to get from one part of the story to the other. But that was kind of good. Most of my questions tonight are about that. I'm going to say this as well before we start chatting properly, because people have brilliantly, helpfully sent in questions. Please keep sending more questions. I know there's a link in the podcast description. If you want to send in other questions during the week, you can do that. It says our forms. Just click on that. But what I'm going to say is we won't cover everybody's questions tonight, because there were a couple in there that I know are going to be really appropriate, pertinent to other weeks and other parts of this story.
Not because they're stinkers.
I'm not ignoring you. I'm speaking specifically to Jeff at this point. I'm not ignoring you, Jeff, and others. Just that, there will be other occasions when we'll talk. There are like big macro questions about Jonah that I think we'll cover later on. So
Not everyone will get a name drop when they submit
No,
a
I've
question.
got to stop doing that. It wasn't
In
very
case
good.
people are
It's just,
fearful.
I'm just making up names now.
Not everyone gets a
No.
name drop.
It's an
for
honour
writing.
to get a name drop, and we won't do it again.
All right, so getting into the sermon. This is what I'm going to start with. This is what I got out of the sermon tonight, thinking primarily about those sailors, and my starting point is the fact that Jonah told them as he got onto the boat that he was running away from God.
Yeah.
But the storytelling doesn't tell you that straight away. It doesn't start with, by the way, I'm running away from God. It's a well-crafted story, because it's like they go, oh.
It's an actor's aside. That's what I heard. It's like,
is that what
just
it is?
one to the audience, just a little, oh, by the way, this is what's happened.
He'd already told them.
Yeah. And that spun all of that story for me. Because then I thought, so they already knew he was running away from God. So they know he's got a relationship with God. But then, like with loads of other these stories, and this is what I love about them, but I know we have to be really careful with the Bible about not adding to or subtracting from the words that are there. But I can't help but go, this is the subtext to that story. Something else he's had a conversation with at least one sailor as he's got on board the boat. He's explained to them, I am running away from God. Then we find out they've all got different gods, or at least some of them have got different gods, because they end up
and that story builds.
Yeah. You've got this bunch of people on a boat worshipping different gods, following, I'm assuming, different gods. And then Jonah in that little society on a boat, all from different places, different peoples, different religions.
It's maybe a presumption about the sailors at the beginning. It's not in the text, but it's like they move from not being fearful of God, the God of the Hebrews, to being fearful. And that's like quite a 360 or 180. I thought let's just go for 180 turnaround. That they are like, you're running away from another God? Like, we're all running away from a God who, brought this bad experience or that bad experience. That's kind of how they would have understood the little kind of gods knocking around at the time. And they've gone from, oh yeah, here's another guy running away from some calamity in his life. They accept him onto the boat.
Yeah.
But sometimes...
And then they turn to a point of being like, no, this guy's God brought this circumstance. Yeah. We have to think differently about his God.
The storm brought that, I think.
Yeah.
So the storm brought the gravity of his... The storm brought his comment to mind. So I think we can often have conversations where somebody will say something in 1 minute, and it just you hear it, but it doesn't mean anything to you until later on, in the evening or later on in the story. Can you imagine if like the baker, the start of the Great Fire of London, probably told a few people, I left the oven on.
Yeah.
And probably just went, oh yeah, okay, whatever. And then
I think I did. Did I leave
maybe
the oven on?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not an important detail. And then after the city burns down, you go, okay, this is a significant thing. So I think similarly with this, yes.
Have you been thinking about the Great Fire of London? Where did that come from?
I left the iron on the other day. Maybe it's to do with that. Yeah.
Not now.
I think I had it in the back of my head I had it in the back of my head when I was prepping the sermon, and I was thinking about the fact that Jonah dropped that bomb in. Or the storyteller drops the bomb in later on. Oh, by the way, he's already told them this detail. And it's a craft to go, oh, wow, it's to explode the moment.
That's what I like in lots of Bible passages, but particularly like these sort of nice chronological linear stories. I like I don't want to add to or subtract from the story, but I like thinking, what is missing here? What might have happened in the gaps without getting fixed on that? I'm also conscious then not turn it into a fairy story.
Shall we would you like to give the sailors names and a backstory?
I would. That's my...
What's a likely sailor's name?
That's my professional age. I need to write down a character history for them, and I need to be them for the next 5 weeks.
Isn't that why we ended up with 3 kings?
Yeah. That's what I mean or an apple, like Adam and Eve and the apple. We just start to fill in the gaps, and then you fill in the gaps, and if that gets told as the story often enough, then that becomes the story. So I don't want to do that, but it does interest me you know, whether he's just said that as a throwaway comment as he's got on, like kind of half joking, or they've taken that as a joke.
Yeah.
That he said, yeah, I'm fleeing from God. He's meant it deadly seriously, and they've just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, whatever.
Like, good quip. Get on the boat.
Yeah, get on the boat.
Yeah. So they've taken that as, oh, he's running away from God, small g, if you like.
Yeah.
And then they get to realise, oh, hang on, this is God, capital G, kind of in that moment.
And yet they don't blame him straight away, do they?
Do they don't really blame Jonah, do
No.
they? Like, full stop?
They go and ask him.
Do they?
Even when they've drawn lots to find out who's responsible, they clearly draw lots, and Jonah comes up as the person who's, anyway, you win or you lose drawing lots.
I don't know how that's...
It's a win, isn't it? A lottery?
If you're going to end up in the sea, probably...
It's defeat.
But that's what I mean, is they're not going, let's draw lots to see who we should throw in the sea. They say, what do they say? We should draw lots to see who's responsible. And even then, he gets picked out as the person responsible, and they still go to him and say, who is responsible? They don't say, it's you. They're like, oh, he must have the answer.
It's like
But years later, he doesn't just point at somebody else and go, him.
when you
Throw him overboard.
When you ask a kid if they've eaten the chocolate cake and they've got chocolate all over their mouth, and you go, did you do it? Did you tell me? Are you responsible for it? And they look at you with like big eyes, chocolate all over their face, and go, no, it wasn't.
But in terms of guilt, you'd think they'd go, but he's asleep.
Sleep doesn't
seems-
suggest guilt, does it?
Depends what you've done. Yeah, no, probably doesn't.
In one sense, it doesn't. But then the storyteller goes, oh, he says, oh, he's asleep, but actually it's like, and this, it gives you these lines, oh, he's going down, he's going down, he's going down. Actually, it sort of suggests, oh man, it's not just that he's asleep, it's that he's...
Oh, so it's like kind of spirally?
It's a bit spirally, and it's a bit, he goes down to Joppa, he goes down into the bowels of the boat.
Oh, I
the
didn't pick
boat's
that up.
creaking and it can't go up with him, and he goes lower and lower. It's like it's not just that he's asleep, it's that he's in it's also that he's in another place altogether.
It is so beautifully written, isn't it? Like, we talked about this
It's a
briefly
good
last
story.
week. I think we said about it, like it being like a symphony, but like the layers, like in it, how much weight you give to those layers is, like we say, needs sensitivity and wisdom.
Well, even when there's a line that says the boat was creaking or something like that, and that's when you first read that through.
So is it threatened to break or something?
It's almost like the boat. So I read a couple of it. Even like old commentaries say, it's almost like the boat comes to life as part of the story and goes, I can't cope with this. I'm falling. Like it becomes a character, not quite, but it's that idea that the boat just goes, I can't. This is so heavy. I'm falling apart. And it puts loads of pictures in your mind.
Yeah.
I can't handle the weight of this storm. Even I'm. The boat is falling apart. It's like
Compared to the power of God.
yeah. It's a emphatic thing, a funny thing, point of emphasis.
Here's my starter question then, in terms of that. So, got the boat, the sailors, all of those people, things, objects, the sea itself, the animals, fish within the sea, all their lives being disrupted.
by the storm.
Yeah, for the sake of having a pop at Jonah, like poking him, provoking him, and he's asleep. All these other lives being disrupted. What are your thoughts on that? I'm assuming fish don't have faith. That's my.
How dare you make that?
All dogs go to
assumption.
heaven and all that.
Yes.
I don't know. Is it okay that God uses non-believers, people, things, animals,
Wildlife.
places to provoke believers? Does he still do that? Or is this just an Old Testament thing? Is this one of those things we chalk up as this is what happened, and then Jesus came, and then there's a change? Is this part of the new covenant?
Yeah, it wouldn't happen after Jesus. This kind
People
of
get provoked.
carry on.
Yeah, it says you on the week when we've had storms in Florida,
Yeah.
etc., that kind of thing.
Because people say that we still use it. It's still an insurance term, isn't it? That act of God.
Yes, there's a
So-
Billy Connolly film about it. Yes, there is. Very good. I think it's
You
called
don't
that.
have to just say that's good just because there's a Scottish
It's-
It's
verse.
Billy Connolly and
Yeah.
everything he touches. Yes.
It's
Anyway,
Scottish.
essentially though, it's a bit of the part of that question is why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? A little bit. Is there an essence of that, or
Is it like
there's a broaderness to it because you've
Mm.
included also why does God allow bad things to happen to good people, sailors, and fishes and animals? And
Well, I think my question is really about the disruption of all those people's, animals' lives. They're not followers, right? They are they are not choosing to follow God. And does it kind of interrupt there? I don't want to tread on the toes of future weeks. We might be talking about free will and how much free will we have. But for those non-believers, in terms of how much free will they have, it's okay that God just uses them to.
yeah, the way that you described it in your sermon
God's
this
hurled
evening,
storm?
he hurled the storm into that place in the sea like he was throwing a spear, is what you said.
And imagine you, some poor fish, just beneath
Has-
weight,
has
been
to
perfectly
suffer.
calm,
A crab
and then you just
just
all get
fiddling along.
chucked about just because Jonah is on a boat and he won't do as he's told.
Well, it's not.
Everyone else gets.
It's not just because Jonah's on. I think this is part of, at least part of the conversation needs to be. It's not just because Jonah's on a boat and he won't do what he's told. It's
Yeah.
because people in the world don't listen. And Nineveh is a train wreck of a place where great horrors are happening.
Okay, but even on that scale, even like that big, so is it okay that because Nineveh needs to be saved, that fish gets chucked about, and that boat gets nearly broken, and sailors are fearing for their lives and fearing for. I know we end up with like those sailors are in a good place.
But they have PTSD forever.
Yeah, they wouldn't have. Yeah, I don't know. They might have been.
They never went on a boat again.
And the sea was probably full of other sailors
Yeah,
who would have similarly gone, "What is this?"
And
Yeah, they
not
can't
had
be
the
the only
experience of meeting Jonah or recognizing who God was in that.
yeah, yeah.
It's interesting. We talked last week about God speaking. Like God is the kind of God that we worship is the kind of God who is always trying to communicate with us, I think. And I think that it plays into some of it that because it's called Jonah in our Bibles, and clearly he's the main character. So we go, oh, it's all about Jonah. The storm was all about Jonah. But the way that the whole earth is put together, the Bible talks about God sustaining it. Like he keeps it going in motion. He sustains all things. And as he does that, I do think that's one of his ways that he communicates to humanity and even to the animal kingdom, if you want to call it, whatever you want to call your sea life stuff like that. He is communicating that he is the sustainer, he is the bringer abouter of all things.
And the holder together.
Even the animals submit to that. I mean, you say, does a fish have faith? We were joking about that. But there is a sense in which in the, I nearly used the word hierarchy, which I don't really like that word, but in that hierarchy.
You might get cancelled for that.
in the order of how the universe is set up. My personal belief in faith is that the animal kingdom submits to God. The physical environment, wind, earth, rain, submits to God.
Okay. In which case, like I'll take that for the fish.
Okay.
And whatever, I'm not going to list them all, but whatever sea
What?
life there is, and the boat. Okay, the boat is not going to have faith, but the sailors themselves.
For them to go through that peril.
Well, I don't know. And now I'm thinking, is that an imposition on them? Is that disruptive for them, or actually are they really fortunate that they're some of the few people that God has actually shown his whole, and not his whole, just a bit of his power and strength to. You know, maybe there are people who go, oh, actually, if I'd been on a boat in a storm and by one godly person asking to be thrown overboard, the storm suddenly calmed, I'd probably,
the people that
more
run
likely to believe.
planes who go down that actually get to say the prayer because their plane's going down and they think they might die.
And I guess you can see this as a get out, but if God is real, if there is a God who controls everything, then there is nothing. You could make the case, and it's kind of hard to make the case, but you could make the case that the only thing that really matters actually forget storms and illnesses and everything else.
Inconvenience.
If God's real, if we are eternal beings, if there is a God of consequence and a God who's holy, then all that matters is you could this is, and I realise I've drifted into giving a get out theological answer. If God's real, then all bets are off, because the only thing that really matters
Yeah,
is finding him. That's not, and I know that, like, I think I can sort of explain that, but then it's hard to
It's uncomfortable at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's what that's what we need to acknowledge, because I think that's and this is not me saying that's an easy answer. I think that's the Sunday school answer, and I think that's the answer that believing Christians will go to. I think we all do that. You go, well, ultimately, God's in charge of it all. God owns all this. Creation is His, so therefore it's okay. Like, well, he can do what he likes, do what he likes with it. But I'm trying to marry that in with a little bit with free will, and with this isn't just about the sailors' free will and Jonah's free will. It's the fact that those who aren't followers are being used to guide somebody else back to God.
And
does that still happen?
I'm kind of comfortable this week. I feel, oh, please forgive me if you're listening in America, which would be unusual, wouldn't it? Imagine if we get that kind of reach. But I'm kind of thinking America is a developed nation.
Mm-hmm.
They've been knowing this storm's coming for a while, and they have enough within their economy and things like that, even though that people's lives will be turned upside down with the storm that's been this week, that largely speaking, fingers, it'll be okay. But I am hugely disrupted in even when, so just like recent things that I can think, like when there's like tidal waves and tsunamis in help me,
everywhere,
like
but
it like in
Shropshire.
Thanks, Ash.
Yeah, no.
But do you know, like
Southeast
tidal waves
Asia,
in Southeast Asia, thank you,
Yeah.
in places where there is no infrastructure, there is no state that's stable enough to repair that damage. Like, there's no warning signs. And I'm sorry, that's not to dismiss
What's happened
in America,
No.
which I actually, hands up, know very little about, other than a snippet on the BBC. But or when like when those big kind of environmental disasters happen, I like
those acts of God.
I know that God is suffering. That's a position of faith that I've come to. And yet when I see the suffering, like when you see a country like Afghanistan, which is already so broken, so far away from God, and then so oppressed, and then they have an earthquake, and my heart does just go, oh, like, it's heavy.
This is my
heavy.
like, this is like a side note to all of my thoughts on this tonight as well, was that idea of an act of God. And you were saying about this storm being hurled at the sea, and I was thinking about those sorts of things. Yeah, storms, environmental disasters, how we still call them acts of God. And then I was thinking, but at the same time, like, loads of these are man-made. Most of the world would agree that the situation in Florida at the moment is brought about because the warming of that Gulf, and that warming of the Gulf has been brought about by man destroying the planet. So that's not actually an act of God, that's an act of man that's brought. But we're all happy to go, when it's going bad,
God,
blame God. It was God's fault. Yeah, people will hate on.
But it's quite interesting that the Bible takes us there as well. The Bible says you need to know on some level. So I think this is part of the problem, on some level, that God is involved in the storm. Whether you say this is free will's taken over, God created this place and there are consequences to the curse of sin, or whether you say God set it all off at the start, that's how he hurled it, or whether you say in that moment God looked at that situation and hurled the storm, whichever way you dress it up, one of the important points, one of the things that the Bible doesn't run away from is like, yes, God's involved in the storms. He's involved in the storms. And over again is gloriously found in the storms.
It's got found in all the storms. Because I think that's the other temptation, is to read a story like this and go, "Ah, right, when there's a problem going on, when you're having a terrible time, it's actually because God wants you to come
Just
back to
find
Him.
God. Just
It's just trying
dig
to teach
deeper.
you. Yeah. Like you must
Lean
be experiencing
harder.
this. You must be experiencing this terrible situation because you're not close enough to God, or you're not following His way.
No, I
So
think
if you
it's
could read
also
that-
just because storms come.
Yeah.
Yeah, just metaphorical storms or real storms. It's also the Bible also says, yeah, storms come, and that's part of being alive too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Don't you think? Maybe I'm the only one who does this, but I think you can read through passages of the Bible and go, "Oh yeah, oh I can, like, not that I can necessarily say I've ever been in that situation where a literal storm has been around me, but our tendency as human beings is to go, where am I in this story?" And we do it in church. We say, like, this is maybe this is actually saying this thing to us as people. Maybe it's talking about the metaphorical storms in our life today. But then you end up going, oh, so therefore, yeah, every time I'm in a difficult situation, it's actually it's because God wants me to
Be nearer to
wake
Him.
up and
Yeah.
do you want people against that? Come on, Ash.
Do I want
As a
people
pastor,
against that?
Yeah. Like if people come to you and go, I'm having this terrible time, and I think,
It's God.
if I was to come to you tomorrow and go, yeah,
I'm
I'm
not-
having an awful time. You want to see my wife and kids? I would never say that. But if I was to say,
Because it could just be that you're having an awful time, and
it could just be my wife and kids.
Yeah, it could be your wife and kids. It could be you.
It could be me.
You need to,
It is.
you need to have a look at
Let me
yourself.
set that record straight. It is.
But what I think what's interesting about the storms is, like, what I'm just reflecting there. How often do I cry out to God in prayer? So that's what you see in some of the storms. And I know we're thinking, right, God moves in loads of ways, and there's lots of storms that don't result in us crying out.
Mm-hmm.
But on a personal level, in terms of prayers that have been real connections to God, I think often they've been in the storms. I can't.
But Jonah
So far,
Jonah doesn't cry out, does he? Like,
well, not to the.
the supposed
It depends
God.
on how we understand it, but
Not yet.
not yet.
Yeah.
But he does. But this, yeah, the
You have
same.
to go down further.
Yeah.
Than the hull of the ship.
But
to actually.
Yes, but the cry out in the story is really interesting. The fact that the sailors end up crying out is incredibly a powerful piece. I think the fact that people we can't imagine, in terms of the other stories, people we can't imagine coming to faith out of nowhere can cry out to God. That's a helpful thing to think about. And you wonder maybe how does that come about?
Yeah, I don't know. Those sorts of conversations I've had with non-Christian friends before. Yeah, you talk about that kind of people do in their worst times cry out to God, even if they haven't got a God that they follow. People do. Well, maybe it just goes back to that thing. If something bad's going on, you kind of blame God, and ergo you think also God can fix it.
People in our jobs in church, people without faith, in bad times, in storms, this is not, please don't think I'm belittling this at all, in hugely weighty situations in life, will often send us a text and say, please will you pray?
Yeah.
It's just an interest. I'm always
just in case.
Yeah, I'm always not exactly sure. I'm not always sure exactly how to deal with that, because
don't people say that a lot?
Because it's not necessarily their faith.
Yeah.
Often people ask us to pray for things all the time, and that's a privilege to do that. So that I want to make that clear.
Yeah.
It's a huge privilege to pray on behalf of someone else, and I think actually that's a real model in the Bible in terms of prayer. But often people of no faith who've told me, I don't have faith, I'm not a Christian, but in a storm would ask for prayer, and praise God that they have that moment to ask for it, but before and after the storm are not interested in. It's a tricky one.
We don't get the after story of the sailors.
No.
Oh, no,
we don't even get what they cried out, do we? We just get they cried out. And that's another one of those gaps I wish we had the dialogue for it. Like, what do they actually say? When somebody doesn't know God, or maybe that's better, maybe there's a purer prayer that goes on then. Because I'm always aware, anytime praying, that there is a churchy routine to prayer, structure. you know, even to the point of I get bothered when our kids pray out loud. Yesterday we were around at the grandparents and like my mother-in-law. This is not a my mother-in-law story. My mother-in-law
I think
said,
there's a place for that here.
"Oh, please, no, don't start with this. Will be a much longer podcast." But my
Your
my
mo-
mother-in-law said,
Who's an avid listener of the podcast?
"I don't know, might be."
She's gonna get a link from me.
Oh. But she'd asked.
Through just before you
Yeah,
continue.
I have. The story's not about stop now saying that. It's not about my mother-in-law. No, the fact was she'd asked one of the boys to give thanks before we were eating, and even saying that, like, give thanks is a, you know. Then I read that as say grace, give thanks for the food, and Stanley, bless him, right?
So he
piped
falls
up.
into the formula.
He took on, yeah, and we've never sat him down and gone, well, this is how you pray. If Yaya ever asks you to give thanks, then do this. We've never said that, and yet it was like
Was it bob on?
tidy. It was a tidy prayer.
Were you a proud parent?
I
Did you
was
think-
conflicted because there was part of me that was proud, and there was part of me going, "Wow, that." Again, I'm not knocking you either, Stan. If you listen to this in the future, I was not saying this is an incorrect or not a thoughtful prayer. But what I'm saying is there was a shape to it that he'd learned from listening to me, you two, Sunday school teachers. He's heard those patterns of speech, and actually, I think sometimes that really detracts from
A unique prayer.
just that, like, yeah, cry of the heart. Just here's the truth. Those we've been doing psalms, like those cries from David, where he just
Let's
vent,
it all out.
just stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
So I would like to hear the sailors' dialogue, because I'm interested in hearing those prayers from people, the untrained prayer, just beautiful truth.
The interesting thing is we get the detail of it. They cried out. We get that detail, and
Yeah,
that to me, at least you can say that. So
Volume.
noise, but probably authenticity. You'd say
Yeah.
this is not. They didn't go to, well, where's the prayer book?
Yeah.
What's the appropriate prayer for a calm sea?
Yeah.
Let's find out.
Start
The
with this-
nautical prayer book.
Do we start this with Almighty God, because it's a big thing, or do we start it with Father, dear Father?
Yes.
But isn't the amazing thing about our God is that sailors, so and I just don't think we don't want to miss that sailors, pagans,
Are you knocking sailors now? You've had a pop at the Americans.
they'll be fine. I don't mean that.
Let's have a go at the sailors now.
Sailors, pagans, not bothered people
Mhm.
about God are able to immediately cry out and be heard. Like that is the kind of God. So because we've been, I think, a little and rightly critical about the kind of God who throws in national
The storm.
no, why did I keep wanting to say that? What am I saying? The disasters.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Natural.
natural, thank you. Not national, but natural.
I could think of a few national
That's the
disasters,
second language.
but that's national disasters are for another podcast.
What's he thinking with that? It's not wouldn't be our way of doing things.
Yeah.
But I don't think we want to miss the fact that literally anyone in the entire planet can cry, just not even words, just the cry of the heart of
Mhm.
"Wah!" like, and he is immediately hearing them. It is,
Yeah.
and again, that's a position of faith, isn't it? But they are immediately heard. And that's just ridiculous. Like, this is
Mhm.
the God who can cause natural disasters and can do that, and yet totally hearing that cry. And yeah,
And I think more than that. So I as I understood that, I think it was a picture of them being saved, salvation, as we understand it. That's how and I'm happy to be
From that cry out.
from the
to-
cry out. That
from
was
the point
them.
on.
Yeah, that was them. That was like a pointer to this is, even if it's
Yeah.
in terms of understanding the Bible story, I would say this is what being saved looks like to a sailor. And I was thinking that's the end of that little part of the story is them. Their cry is a cry of is a salvationary cry, and that does blow my mind that God
Yeah.
hears that. When we have to, in terms of how we understand God, we have to hold those two things together: the God of the storm and the God who hears every cry and can answer every cry.
Yeah.
And we're humbled by that, and we realise how far off an understanding of God we have, I think, sometimes.
And how far away that would have been from the Hebrew Jewish tradition at the time as well. They were from the heart, directly trying to communicate to God, speaking.
Yeah,
to
they
God,
wouldn't
to
have
God.
known
Did you know
Deuteronomy 6 or any of the prayers that you're supposed to regale.
The Shema.
Yeah.
Is it 6? It's 6, isn't it? Deuteronomy 6.
And they were just allowed?
Mm.
Is that God
Yeah.
just giving them a separate,
I think it's
an allowance?
God's word giving us a glimpse of.
Is that a bit of grace? Is that like first bit of,
Yeah.
there you go, you
But I
can't go
love-
through a temple here because you're in the middle of this, so
I don't know if I expressed it in the sermon, but I love that. I think part of that story is look what God can do. Look where you end up as Jonah's. Look how limited your stubbornness and your pride can make things, and can you keep your mind open to the fact that the person you've not thought of, the person you think of beyond salvation, has an amazing, peaceful, storm calming moment with me out of nowhere. I think that's just incredible, and I think, and it sounds like ethereal and unbelievable, and yet every now and again you see it in people's lives. You see these moments.
Yeah, I mean, I know this. We're not particularly talking about prayer, tonight as like a subject of prayer, but
well, it wasn't. Yeah,
I think the subject of prayer is incredible in terms of thinking, the prophet of God, his prayers are not any more or less powerful than the sailor
Yeah.
in the sea.
Yeah.
They don't have any more special access in God. Similarly, when we're asked to pray for things, or if we're praying for other people, there is no extra special power, no matter who's praying for you on your behalf. And
in which case, do you ever say back to like non-believers who say, "Can you pray for me?" Do you ever just say, "You can, you do it"? Like,
I kind of almost don't want to say this out loud in case somebody gets a text from me like this and they're like, "Oh, that's Jude's answer." But often I'll say to people, and I'm kind of admitting this, I'll join you in prayer about that, because I do feel that that's a way to think about prayer differently. And so if you ever get a text from me that says, "I'll join you in prayer," it's genuine. It's
Yeah,
not like
yeah.
fob off.
no, that's not
It-
flippant.
It's a please, let's pray about this together. Because for just the very reason that what I've just said, my prayer isn't any more powerful or more special than anybody else's. And bless him, Stan, who prayed his grace in a lovely pattern
In English to start with.
in English,
They told
legible.
him, yeah.
Those prayers that are learnt are not less or more powerful than the heart's. Like,
Yeah.
even all of it is about that. Is about genuineness, and I think there can be genuineness in a prayer book type prayer. I really believe that, actually.
Well,
I really
Psalms
believe
is that.
in that those repetitive things can be in the right circumstances, and the person of whose heart is right are no more or less
Yeah.
powerful. I don't know. Do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree with it. My thoughts are, I'm thinking that, like, and language is like the first layer of that, isn't it? That kind of shapes, makes my prayers. I'm going to talk about myself. Makes my prayers more worldly, maybe slightly less authentic. Because the daft thing is, I sometimes spend time. When I do spend time, I should admit, not regularly enough, but when I do spend time talking to God, I spend a good chunk of that time trying to think of the right word, as if like God's bothered about the semantics of where
How you start.
Yeah, even just in thought. Yeah, once language is there, language is in the way. It becomes another hurdle, it's another barrier, and we get worried about that. And I also get worried about like the prayers I've prayed before, as if God's keeping a log of the things. You're laughing at me like I'm the only person who does this. But yeah, I think about I prayed for this just yesterday. Why am I not waiting for? And then all these other thoughts creep in and get in the way of just the venting of whatever's on my heart, on my mind, however you want to phrase that in English. It's
interesting because you mentioned David. I'm sorry, I feel like we are going off on a tangent, but I'm sorry, I just can't almost help myself. You mentioned David in the Psalms and the fact that he's so like heart cryy, raw, like, but
Honest.
yeah,
Some of it, yeah.
but the Psalms are beautifully crafted poetry.
Yes.
They're both.
Yeah.
They are words, language that have been thought of, paused over, repeated century after century by the people of God
No doubt
as
edited
prayers.
before they got
Yeah.
in
Well,
front of the
great songs are both those things, aren't they? When you hear a great song,
That's true.
No.
like if you hear,
Don't.
That's a beautiful thought.
Well, there might be
what's
people off.
the elbow song, the famous
Which one? One Day Like This.
One Day Like This. When you hear that, that is, you'd say it holds both heart and poetry.
All of Guy Garvey's lyrics are
like authentic, but then crafted as well. And I think praise.
And can be repeated.
Yeah.
But when I often think about prayer and understanding it from the perspective of a father who hears their kids come to them, and it's all. Sometimes when you hear kids come to you in a fake way, you're like,
Do your kids ever come to you like that?
Yeah.
Almighty Father. Everlasting, actually.
Yeah.
They never.
Well, no,
never
but
come in with that.
they come with that same.
I'd love to watch
Let
you
me
doing that.
They come with that same. Can I pull one over on him? You know, can I do all that? But then if you spot them, even if they've got no eloquence, but if they just come with honesty, it's like, oh man, that's
even if it's the worst thing,
insanely moving. Even if they're saying, yeah, I did the horrible thing.
Yeah,
that is incredible. And so when you think of that through God's eyes, you're thinking, right, so it's not a crafted prayer. All I'm saying is, God, I've done the terrible thing, and yet, and that God will go, that's amazing that you can say that. And I think there's a real truth. Like some of David's very eloquently put Psalms are basically saying, God, I did the terrible.
Yeah,
I've just done the terrible thing, and it becomes a book for us.
Yeah,
because we don't. The other thing with this is we don't always have the words. I think that's the other thing. We can just make noises and
that's
that.
okay.
But sometimes, like with the song, if you see the words, you think, oh, actually, that helps me express myself.
Yeah.
We are
next podcast series.
Prayer, yeah.
We are off at a tangent.
That's all right. You can digress onto prayer, I think. Yeah, let me give you some. Let's have a proper question. Is that clear enough? Craig wants me to do proper questions. Do you
proper questions should maybe have
questions.
like a little
like a sound?
Questions needs a jingle. All right, let's start with. Do you think, because this is where the sermon went to tonight as well, again, for anyone who didn't listen, feel free to go back and listen to the sermon. It was very good. I should say that as well. I feel like I should say that every week now.
Just so you know, he said that with a glint in his eyes that suggests could be true. I might just be playing around with
it. Judge. You go back and listen to it, you're the judge. Yeah, so this was off the back of the sermon, which led us to a place of thinking about being awake. There were zombies in the service.
That's a reason to listen to it.
That is.
We started with zombies.
Yeah. So the question is, do you think the church is awake? That's big. The church. The whole church.
Is that church with a big C or a small C?
Small C on here.
I never remember which one's which with that. Sorry.
This one's the small C. All of them together is the
big C.
The global church.
Is the big C.
Go on, let's go with the big C then. Is the big C awake?
Oh, the big C?
Well,
is the church globally? Is the church globally awake?
The global church. All Christians.
And how do you tell?
How do you tell if a church is awake or if it's asleep?
Well,
I think if you've been
snoring,
yeah.
if their eyes are shut, if they get the jolt of
just as an aside, I have preached a sermon before. I won't name the church. It was a smaller church, and we were well over 50% were sleeping. To the point where
take it personal.
Well, you can't help but take it personal. And some of the sleepers afterwards gave me the warmest, heartiest. I want to thank you for that word, and I wanted to say to them, well, I could see that
maybe that's what they needed.
Very well, yes.
And that was a job well
God
done.
had it in mind that yes.
I listen to Garrison Keillor going to sleep because that's just like a nice warm voice.
Yeah,
it's that low, soothing voice.
In terms of answering the question, there are some churches that are. Some churches that were actually asleep as I was preaching.
Same church where the lady told you needed elocution lessons.
Yeah, I've had that. Yeah. And
again,
feel
free to text in.
Yeah, probably had a point. Yeah. Anyway, so
you can even tell. That's I like.
how can you
I
tell?
wanna, yeah, I want to answer that, but I don't know even. I don't know how.
What would
to
it,
tell
what
if the
would
church is
what would
awake.
being awake look like? What would being asleep look like?
Mm,
I think I'd be careful with the can you even tell, because I think that just we go, oh, we don't want to box it up so that we're in or out. And yet, like when you read about how Jesus speaks about the churches in Revelation,
mhm.
he's really clear about the ones that he thinks are asleep and the ones that he thinks are awake.
Okay.
And he's
go
like,
on.
sort yourself out, guys.
What's the list of things? I can't remember.
I can't
From
remember
the
either.
Lukewarm.
various.
I spit you out my mouth.
How do you tell lukewarm church?
Yeah.
Lukewarm people generally asleep.
Yeah, I can't remember all the list of the various.
But there,
I think part of the story of the sermon was it's easier than you think to fall asleep. I think that's part of it. It's a satirical punch at a bunch of people in the Hebrew people who really would have thought that they were awake. You know, they would really have thought they were awake, and actually they were asleep. So I think one of the things that the sermon gets us to think is, oh, actually, you can. Oh, the story of Jonah gets us to think rather, and lots of stories in the Old Testament is it's easier than you think to nod off and fall asleep. Like the Book of Hebrews. If you ever read through the Book of Hebrews, it's got this underlying factor
yeah,
of
that's a good example.
these people keep drifting off. And it's not to sleep, but you could almost read it like they're just drifting off. They're going away from the truth. They're just doing this. They're going away and
Adding bits on
adding bits on.
that aren't the primary.
Or even just like just drifting along, which is a bit sleepy,
Yeah,
isn't
coasting,
it? Just
yeah.
coasting, yeah. Sleepwalking, zombieing their way through. I think I think the church can easily, whether it is or it isn't, it can easily get to that point where it's just doing its own thing. And I always think of, have you ever seen Saving Private Ryan?
Yes.
With Upham. Do you remember Upham at the end where it's
Which one's he?
Upham is the guy with the typewriter at the end, and there's these few scenes where he could really help out, but
Oh, was he the
everything
bit of a weedy one?
is
Sorry.
is slighter of build.
Is he a bit wet?
A bit wet.
He's yes, he's a bit wet. But anyway, there's a critical moment where he could help out his mate,
Oh, that's the worst.
and he's on the staircase.
It's awful.
And
Oh,
he just
no.
well,
Spoiler alert. For
he
anyone who hasn't
just
seen Seven Fire Ryan.
like, and then he clicks into life later on when everything's resolved. But in that moment, he's just a nothing. He just disappears, and
Is his mate not being like strangled
his mate's
horrifically or? Oh no.
It's horrific.
It's so slow and painful.
so slow.
Like I
It's the
wouldn't
most
sleep
tragic
at night
part.
because it's so sad.
Thank you, Ash, for bringing
Sorry.
that back up. That was good.
But then I think the church can get.
Whilst people are being slowly stabbed, the church
No,
is waiting in the stairwell.
Well, yeah, I think sometimes we can miss we just become it can become irrelevant. It can become not a noise. It can do its own thing for so long and actually have its own groups and its own little clubs. And actually, before you know it, it's not. It's like a bit like Upham on the staircase. There's loads going on. There's loads that need help. There's loads that need interaction. Church can get like that. Also, that it can be ridiculously awake. You could look at churches and you see social need. You see heart. You see people who are like culturally on it and really believe in the message, and it can be completely awake. So I think like you said, it's hard to see. It can easily waken up and it can easily fall asleep.
Yeah,
That's a bit Sunday school answery, but I think it's like that.
That's all right. I think it fell through, isn't it?
I think there's some truth to it.
Yeah, my take would be that you can't. I don't think you can necessarily. You can only tell. Like, I am part of this church. I can only tell whether this bit of this church is awake.
Yeah.
I can't tell whether you two are or not. That's not for me to judge, and it's easy to put on the show. I think.
You mean this bit? Sorry, you pointed to me
when
you said this bit.
This bit is me. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I can only vouch for myself in that as part of Big C Church.
Although do you
So I
not
can only
think
say, if I'm awake, then yeah, the church is awake because.
In our judgmental way, which your sermon talks about being judgmental, but it's quite easy to go retrospectively with that kind of historical lens. Go, oh, look at that denomination.
Yeah.
Look at that movement. Look at that. You know, those are times it's maybe harder to see, or maybe we don't want to see in our current circumstances.
Yeah.
That analyzing of.
And we'd all have
weakness.
a different opinion about what awake was.
We'd want to justify
what
it.
do you need to wake up to? Because you might say, "Oh, just keeping the lights on. We have not put the light. We've been here forever. We're awake." And then some people would say, "Oh, actually, you need to be speaking about this, or you need to be speaking about this."
Yeah.
Everyone's got their own version of what it means to be woke or awake, haven't they?
And I do think there are places where the church is falling out about that quite badly in terms of what it means to be awake, which doesn't always look great, if I'm being honest.
Where are you thinking of?
Where the church where certain groups of the church say, in being awake, we want to let you know that the right way to live looks exactly like this. In your relationships, in your sexuality, in other things like that. These are probably the most common examples.
Yeah.
And other groups of the church go, you're wrong to that. And there's the infighting in the church. Then actually, in the name of awakeness, seems to the church itself looks worse off for it, for its infighting and division, perhaps. And yeah, instead of exalting God's name, it feels like it can bring shame to it almost, of the way that we express awakeness at times. Sorry, that's quite...
No,
It's a somber note.
I'm wondering that.
I think often we can, in the name of awakeness, where I think there's a wisdom in not and picking the right things to be awake to.
You've turned it round.
So
But see, even if you're using those terms, awakeness, and I can't help if somebody says awake or awakeness now, I can't help think of the word woke, and then that's again the language just getting in the way of the message. Sometimes we could go down a whole rabbit hole of what that word means. People, yeah. So even the church being awake, I guess, yeah, to different people that's going to mean some very different things. And at the moment, I'm guessing there's probably a lot of this is me not being dismissive. There's going to be a lot of Christians younger than me who will go, no, an awake church looks like
we'll hear about these issues.
Yes, these are the most important things. And again, that is not me being dismissive of anything that would, be a typically woke thing to be bothered about, because those things we should be bothered about those things, and we should be doing better at those things. But I'm just saying, just even in terms of that, the language is sometimes unhelpful. But
it's loaded, isn't it? The language is loaded, and I think well, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you do that deliberately tonight? You must have. In fact, I know you must have.
Titanic boo-boo was deliberate, but nobody... I thought
Titanic,
that was...
Good one.
I thought it was a great line, but nobody that was deliberate. What?
The language of awakened and awoke and all that kind of stuff. You were deliberate in your language with that, weren't you?
Just to engage people on thinking about what they thought being awake was.
Did you expect a laugh after Titanic?
I was.
Did you wait? Was there a pause for laughter?
I left. Yes, I left.
I was.
Carry on.
Yeah. Died inside for a second. I can run with that. I've not been laughed at before. This is familiar ground. They won't really know if it was a joke or not. If they've not laughed, they'll just think I was making a point. You crack on.
Titanic.
No, the Titanic. It was a Titanic boo-boo. I was trying to be emphatic, and
it's not that funny, though, is it?
No, it's not that funny, but you could at least go. Oh, that's
nautical porn. Yeah.
It's not a bad nautical porn.
Stick up for him. What I'm saying is, if you're going to make the audience laugh, you need to do better.
Wow.
Should I have stamped my foot and done jazz hands?
Well, let me bring this back to Jonah. So, this is a good question. Did Jonah sleep because he had faith that God would save him, or because he was in denial? I don't think those are the only two options. Did Jonah sleep because he had faith in God? Is that why he was asleep? Was he like totally relaxed? He can't have been. He knew he was running away from God. Or was he asleep because he was in denial?
I think mostly the storytellers emphasizing that he's asleep when he should be awake to what's going on. So I don't think in that moment. Yeah, I mean, often the psalmist would say he'd connect sleep with faith. So I think it's a well-worn Bible road in terms of how we associate confidence in God with our sleep. But I don't think in this instance is at the bottom. I don't think it's because he's confident in God. I think it's a mark of how zombie she is in terms of what God's doing. That was my take on the story. It's up on deck. There's every reason to be awake. God's at work. There's an important mission. There's every reason to be switched on.
Anyone else in that situation would be awake.
You've got to be switched on, and he's not switched on, and it's silly that he's. I think in this story, it's like, look how ridiculous Jonah is sleeping. It's not because he's tired. We're not supposed to feel sorry for him. It's like, this is ridiculous that you've.
And it's part of that downness that you were talking about, that downward spirally thing.
Yeah, just him going down and getting away from everything. I think that's what it is. What are the other?
He's trying to have. So there are two options there, where whether he's sleeping because he's got a strong faith, or whether he's sleeping because he's in denial.
So I think probably nearer to denial.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
Okay.
Any other opinions?
I don't know why. It's another one of those bits that I would love to have filled in the story. He was sleeping because he was totally shattered from his running so far, or just because he, don't know, within the ship maybe just didn't realise the extent of the storm. Or
another one with a wee bit of nuance is when he went, and this is a slight aside, but when he says, "Oh, just throw me into the sea."
Yeah.
So you look at that on one hand, you go, "That's." I think it's mostly he's saying it's a bit of nobility. It's like, go. This is the only way that we're going to resolve this.
Save yourselves. Yeah.
Would just throw me in. But also, a few commentators say he's just so done with
being God's man.
Being God's man is like
he's also, like really depressed.
He's really really depressed, and he's like, just throw me in. I don't want to go to Nineveh. Just it'll solve it, but also I don't want to go to Nineveh. And I don't know if that's overreading the story, but it wouldn't be out of line with his character.
I'm really sorry, but the woke thing just hasn't gone off in my head yet.
Go on.
Is that okay to go back to it? Because I think we got distracted, but we talked about how is the church awake to cultural sensitivities and things like that, and that we need to be aware and think more about cultural sensitivities of that time. But I think, and I'm sorry, I know it's like Sunday schoolish, but I do think what we need to be bringing into those cultural sensitivities is Jesus. I feel like I just want to say that out loud, just so that, like, on the record, because if we're just bringing opinion to those cultural sensitivities, then that just is more.
Yeah, it's just more noise.
It's more noise.
Yeah,
it's more noise and
more boundaries, more barriers,
more obstacles.
Yeah.
And I actually think
and biases within that. I think there's too much like, this is my experience, so I think this is important. Or this is what I've been taught when I was a child. There's all of these like,
So
the whole.
I'm really sorry to just add that back in, because I know we can't go into that, but it was going off in my head.
Yeah.
Like, and I just need to put things away in my head as well, so that I can keep going with other conversations. Yeah. Okay. Apologies. Okay. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's have one last question. So
shall we do the code word?
Oh, we haven't done it yet.
Well, you've really got to earn your free coffee.
If you've got this far.
Well, let's up the ante. Coffee and a cake.
What? Oh, budgeted for this.
If you've gotten this far,
treasure. We need the treasure.
We've covered some deep stuff. We've not answered half the questions that we promised we'd answer. I think
some of them.
Coffee and cake. If you can remember that the code word
is. The code word is sailors. So, final question. What things can we do to help ensure that we stay awake in our faith?
I'm getting a million Sunday school answers into my head, so I'm going to hold out to see if I can deliver it.
Red Bull, energy drinks. What about them?
What's the spiritual equivalent to a red?
Of a Monster.
Is there a link?
A can of Monster.
Is there a link between like being spiritually able and being physically able? You're joking, saying like Red Bull, and I do sometimes think. I sometimes get into conversations with people. Oh man, I might be taking this on another tangent. I have conversations with people in the daytime where I genuinely think partway through the conversation about God, about Christianity, about me going to church,
and they're falling asleep.
And I think they're not falling asleep. They probably are. They're dying inside. But I genuinely think partway through, I haven't got the energy for this. I haven't. I sometimes think, I wish I was having this conversation about 4 hours ago. I'm like,
This is a good conversation, but I am not.
and I can totally 100% add into that. I didn't get enough sleep. This is me being really open about it. And Liz will attest to this. The number of times we're like, we need to go to bed earlier. You should go to bed earlier. And everything else that factors into that, like whatever you want, diet, exercise, all of that factors in to be better equipped, to be awake in the more metaphorical sense. Do we have to literally be better?
Have a disciplined lifestyle in terms of sleep.
Is that taking
5 foot in veg?
Yeah. Is there a responsibility on
exercise?
Does it moisturize?
Like
where does it end?
To be a good, where does it? I bet you can guarantee there'll be like televangelists be like, yeah, you should moisturize.
Church has a brand of moisturizer you can buy.
Does it?
Christchurch. One church will. There'll be a church out there.
They will.
A surprising place to find moisturizer.
Yeah. I don't think that warrants that much laughter.
Because he visualised it. He visualised a little tub.
I don't think my face is a good face for it's before and after. Not before.
Does that help us stay awake in our faith if we're like physically better?
It's amazing if you read through certainly some of the Old Testament instructions on how you should eat and the fact that you should have peace and you should trust
peace.
A day of rest.
Both. Like a day of rest. Yeah. If you follow the diet that God gave to the Hebrew people, if we literally had Sabbath, we'd probably be.
Would we be better witnesses? Would we be more awake in our faith?
Probably be more awake. Yes. If, like, for example, if I and Jude were offering encouragement to do this, if I trusted in God enough on the Saturday not to work, as often happens on the Saturday doing the sermon, and I had a Sabbath, then maybe God, I'd just have enough. Maybe that would, maybe I'd be
more energy to wing it on a Sunday.
Well, I'd just have more energy to talk to people. Yeah. Maybe there's some truth in that.
I don't know. I think this gets all really complicated when we start packaging it up like that, because then also God just says, ask me for your daily bread, what you need for today. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about tomorrow and what's going to happen, whether you'll add another few years to your life because you went out for a run regularly. I look after the sparrows. So there's just it just gets messy, doesn't it? And we come with our own cultural sensitivities and national policies on what healthy living looks like. So I'm not sure, Matt. I don't know. Okay. And at this, I like to consider myself a health professional, so I'm pro encouraging these things in people. Pro encouraging definitely.
You are now the voice of the NHS. So
thank you.
Be careful what you're saying. This is recorded. NHS says.
Part of the answer of the sermon anyway was like perspective keeps you awake. So remembering at least bits of what I said was remember that God's taught us that we're on the same boat.
That
wakens us up to the need for forgiveness, the need for empathy, things like that.
And the capacity for that as well was what you were saying.
Yes, and we're wakened up to mission. We're wakened up to we've actually been. There's a purpose to our lives. I think there is. God has said, you're here. Here's some of the things that you're here for, and you can waken up to that, and you can waken up to there's need, so you can waken up to that. So I don't know if that's too trite an answer, but I
think that's the best answer. It's the best answer you've had tonight, I think.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
It just gives me permission to go to bed at midnight or after. I can only do.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. Hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully this chat's prompted some other questions and comments. So if you do have anything to say, then please keep it clean. But please do get in touch via email at hello@xchurch.org.uk. Have a good week.